series is a form of educate. So it's a very, very important part of our mission, and we appreciate
Ron, are you there? Hello, Ron.
Hello.
Gary? Gary, are you there?
Yep, I'm still here. Okay. I don't hear Ron anymore though.
Okay.
I must have got me.
Oh, people have lost the audio. Okay, someone else says they're able to hear, so I don't know if Ron is. Okay, Ron, I think we've lost you, but let me just proceed. I guess in the interest of time, I'm just going to cover, and when Ron jumps back, he can continue. So Ron was saying about the PPC user mission, and it is to support, educate, and advocate. And this is one of those forms of supporting, educating, or the user community. So this whole PPC user is all about you, and we would highly encourage that you participate. And you can participate in many ways, one of them being a speaker at an upcoming webinar. So thanks to Gary, we have Gary as one of our speakers today. The second way you can contribute and share your knowledge is through the tips and tricks with other PPC users, or perhaps participate in an upcoming panel discussions. We are going to have one of the panels on Creo and Windchill coming up soon, so do let us know if you are interested in becoming a member on the panel. And perhaps another way would be to send a short video of maybe how to use a specific feature in Windchill or Creo that, or any of the other PPC products, in fact, that you may have discovered as part of your daily interaction with the software. So if ever you wish to contribute, please contact Ron or myself. I'm Madhavi Ramesh, and feel free to contact either of us, and we'd be happy to point you in the right direction. So what's next? We are going to have another webinar in this continued series of webinars. So it's going to be on the 22nd of June. So do mark your calendars. 11 o'clock Eastern is typically when we have these webinars. Another important announcement is the PTC User Technical Community Open Forum Winter 2018. And it's a great location. It's in San Diego. And I believe the Wyndham San Diego Bayside is an awesome place to have this technical forum event, and of course, kind of enjoy I believe there is view of the ocean and stuff. So it's from January 16th through 18th. So please make sure that to plan your travel ahead of time. And lastly, one of the key questions that we get is about the previous webinars. I believe we had 4 or 5 of those in the last few months, and you can gain access to all of the webinar information, the previous presentations, and some of the config files and all of the stuff that the presenters have provided. So make sure you register on ptcuser.org, and here's a slide that talks to the location. So it's all posted in the resources section right on the top, and you should be able to go get access to the information. So please click on the PTC User Webinar Series, and you should have the information there. And if you don't have access to that, please do let myself or Ron know, and we'd be happy to help you find the information. With that said, I would like to share a slide or two about my company. I am with a company called Panditas, and we deliver just in time and just the information that a Creo or a Windchill user is looking for when they are, carrying out their daily job with these tools. And the reason you might want to consider looking at this tool is because it provides the information in a very personalized, contextual and structured environment. Personalized because it is very specific to the role or the capability that the specific user is looking at. So if it's a Windchill user and the user is an admin user, they would get admin related information like operating system information, compatibility and stuff like that. That if it's, let's say, a regular user that touches and works with, let's say, Creo, and they are working with mold design, they would get specific information. And also it's contextual because you can get information about, how do I use a specific feature? What are the tips and tricks to use a feature and so forth. So here's an example of our UI, very simple. You can search for information. You can get tips and tricks about Creo, Windchill, ThingWorks, and many other products, SolidWorks, NX, and so forth. You can also get 360-degree view of the product, whether it's videos, articles, tips, tricks, and so forth, and also the trending discussions. And I was just trying to show here, if you were to search for the word change, which is the topic of today, you would get a lot of information pertaining to change, including open issues, documents, videos, customer presentations, and so on and so forth, that occurs between, both in the Windchill and the Creo parametric product. So if you're interested, we'd be happy to take you through the software just to get your thoughts and, see if it's interesting to you. So if you're interested, please do contact me, and I'd be happy to take you through it. With that said, I would like to turn this over to Gary and to talk to us about the flexible engineering change process and a standardized way of doing that. So let me make you the presenter, Gary. Did you get the access to?
Yep, looking at it now.
Okay, we see your screen.
Okay. Are you able to see everything still? Is the webinar window in the way as well?
No, I don't believe so.
So you're not seeing the webinar window?
No.
Okay. I will continue then. Okay, so for those folks who did attend the TC sessions a few weeks back, this is a presentation that I did give there. This is a project that is ongoing at TE Connectivity right now to move engineering change from an Innovia-based platform over to Windchill. With that, we've tried to re-engineer a few things and come up with some other unique ideas. Make sure my screen's working here. The really core problem that we ran into, in moving our engineering change process from the one system to the next and kind of restructuring it as we did so was this exact problem statement. From a IT perspective, we wanted a standard enterprise engineering change process that gave us the ability to easily maintain that process, use common components across multiple business units, et cetera, et cetera. The problem we ran into, though, is from a business unit perspective, and TE being a company of several business units, from a business unit perspective, each of them wanted their own process variability. So the real problem statement that we had was, how do I create a standardized engineering change process that is also flexible at the same time? And what we did is we looked at two basic areas where we could accomplish that. And we're going to step through some of these in some detail. So if you're a technical person, there's some very technical details that I'll get into in this presentation. If you're more of a high-level person that's curious about the content, there's some of that as well. I do get into the technical details. That's one thing that kind of drives me crazy when I hear presentations. They show you this new stuff, but then they don't really give you any idea of how it's technically implemented. So I will get into some technical details. The two areas of flexibility that we looked at was, how can I first provide dynamic content? And when I say dynamic content, I mean on your task assignments, how can I change what you're looking at? How can I change your instructions? How can I change the affected objects you're looking at? How can I change that data dynamically based on who you are, what role you're in, what product you're responding for? And the second piece is, how do I provide process flexibility? So the workflow process itself. We have business units, for example, in our company that have very specific steps in an engineering change process that they have to go through, and then we have other business units that don't need those things at all. So how do you provide the business units the flexibility they need to walk through their engineering change process, but at the same time, not burden other business units with those process steps when they aren't required for them. So what we're going to look at for the dynamic content is the use of task form templates, specifically the native task form templates, as a way to provide that dynamic content. And from a process perspective, there's a few different alternatives that we looked at to provide a more flexible ECR/ECN process, and we'll talk about each of those and let you know basically the direction we went. So starting with task form templates, one of the things I asked at the end of the session, the live work session, was how many people are familiar with what task form templates are and how to use them. There weren't a lot of hands that went up, and I, generally speaking, in discussions I've had with folks in the past, a lot of folks don't necessarily know what these things are. So task form templates, and you can see in the top left-hand screen, that's how you would get to them. TE is our org, so you can get to them from an org templates. You can get to it from product templates. And when you go into templates, there's a menu at the top. You can choose task form templates. Task form templates are what control the content of your workflow assignment. So when you get an assignment to do something, that assignment, the content of that assignment, the format of that assignment is controlled by these task form templates. If you've done nothing else, you're just getting the default templates, which gives you the instructions and everything that you've put into your workflow process. However, there's other opportunities. There's 3 different types of templates. There's a description of them here. JSP templates, exactly what you think it is. You provide a JSP file, and whatever content you put into that JSP file, whether it be HTML, dynamic server content, whatever it is you put into that template is what's going to be rendered on your task. XDP templates they basically render as a PDF. It's an XML syntax template that ends up rendering as PDF. You need, some kind of Adobe designer in order to implement those. I've not used these myself, so I'm not super capable of answering a bunch of technical questions about XDP templates. JSP templates we've used a lot here. Native templates are the last ones. Those are the ones we're moving to, and this presentation is intended to cover those in particular because they offer a whole lot of value, which we're going to cover in the next bunch of slides. The native templates basically use all the action framework. What used to be JCA that is now moving to MVC. For the non-technical folks, I'm not speaking English to you right now, but for the developers on the phone, most of you are aware with what the JCA framework was and how it's moving to MVC. It's basically PPC's behind the scenes frameworks that they're using to render UI components. And the new native templates take advantage of a lot of that functionality and give you plug and play capabilities to plug actions and dynamic content into those task assignments. Configuring native task form templates. So wanted to walk everybody through this real quick. So if you were to go to that previous screen that I just showed you, you click the new button, this is the wizard that you get. Real quick, I'm not going to read word for word everything that's on the slide. Obviously, you have to provide your template with a name. This becomes super important later when you're in your workflow process administrator and you're on your activity tab and you're choosing a template. That name is what's going to show up in that list, and we'll look at that some more later. Your subject class, you can see in the screenshot that I've got displayed here, I've chosen WT change request 2. This is very important. If you just choose WT object, which is the default, it's going to limit your actions menu. So if you go to the details page for a change request, up in the top left-hand corner, there's an actions menu with a whole list of actions. If you choose WT change request 2 here, when your template renders an assignment, all those actions that you could see on the details page of a change request can also be available right there on the task assignment. But that assumes you chose change request 2 as your object. So if you just chose WT objects, obviously your list of actions is going to be very small. You're going to get the standard things like view and open and maybe copy and paste, but you're going to get a very limited set of actions. So when you're creating these templates, you really want to think about what is my primary business object for my workflow process, and probably try to be a little cognizant of the object you're choosing for your task form templates. There are use cases where you might want to make that subject class a little more generic so that you can use this template across multiple object types. For example, if you wanted to use this template for a promotion request, a change request, and a change notice, you wouldn't choose change request. You would choose something more generic like WT object. But there's some pros and cons to doing that, so those are things to keep in mind. The task type that's listed there, you can see in the slide there, the different task types and the different options you get from those are listed. A high level basically gives you different voting options on those tasks, but even those voting options, as most are aware that have done the technical workflow configuration, you can change those voting options via your routing. And then obviously your description just provides a description of your form template, so that in the previous screen that we were on just a minute ago, folks who are looking at those task form templates, can identify what this template is for. The last piece, which is the grouping at the bottom, the top radio button is what you would use if you were going to use a standard JSP or XDP template, and you would upload your JSP file or you would upload your XDP file, and your template would be based off of that. End of story, you're done, right? The second one, which we're going to cover in more detail here, is configuring your task form template in a wizard, and that is basically going to use the native task form template framework, and we're going to walk through that some more. So the first piece is, if we start on the left-hand image, the first piece of defining your task form templates, your native task form templates, is what tabs are going to be on your task assignments, and we'll see this later. So the tabs defines when you get a task form when you get an assignment, by default, if you're using the default assignments, you probably just get one tab at the top of your assignment that says template view or something similar. With the native task form templates, you have the ability to define your tabs dynamically. So you can see I've got tab 1, tab 2, et cetera, et cetera. So that would lay out tabs horizontally across your workflow task assignment. So you can define, what tabs you want here. The next step is your actions. So when you get a task form assignment, so we're on the middle image now, your main task assignment on the main tab, there's usually an actions button in the top left-hand corner. Again, as I mentioned earlier, since I chose change request 2 as my subject class, you can now see that I can select which actions I want to be available to the user directly on their task assignment. So they don't have to click to go to the details page of a change request to perform standard change request actions. They can do those right from the task assignment. Our discussions with our user communities and most folks that I talk to after the live work thing have similar issues. For users, it comes down to number of button clicks. If I take you from one system and the number of button clicks was 2 to a system where number of button clicks is 5, you're probably not happy. So it was really about reducing button clicks. So if I can get them the actions they need right on their task assignment and not force them to go to a details page or go hunting around Windchill to find what they're looking for, that's exactly what they were looking for. The last piece is the image to the far right-hand corner. This is about defining, now once you've got your task assignment, right, for an ECR, for example, there's usually an affected objects table. Well, you can have more items than that. So for each one of your tabs now, you define on tab 1, I want to see attributes, I want to see discussions, I want to see the setup participants table, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe on tab 2, you want to see history, you want to see your notebook, et cetera, et cetera. And then we're actually going to get into how can you create your own custom MVC components that you could select here. So in my list there, for example, you can see there's a doc publish validation, a bomb publish validation, and a miscellaneous publish validation. Those are custom Windchill tables that we've defined here that we try to put into our task form assignments so that users can very clearly see what validation messages for other systems are. So for instance, when we publish data downstream to another document management system. We publish data downstream to SAP. Well, there's validation messages that come back from those systems, and those 3 custom components is basically how we render those messages back to the user so that they can help themselves as opposed to putting in a ticket with us to solve the problem. Now is when we get a little more technical. So this particular slide walks you, again, there's a little more to this than what's on this PowerPoint slide, but at a high level, this is how you would go about creating your own custom action. So that previous slide, far right-hand corner, if you wanted your own action to be in that list, i.e., we're all familiar with the standard wind chill HTML tables, right, that have got the columns across the top, and you can sort, and you can, they've got the checkboxes down the left. You can build your own custom tables with your own custom content. The way you would go about doing that is basically these steps. You've got to create an action in your actions XML file, probably custom-actions.xml file unless you've implemented others. You've got to add that action to an action model in the action model.xml file. You'll notice the action model name in particular here is work item third nav configurable. If you want your action to show up in that list that was on that previous slide that I just showed, that is the model name that your action needs to go into. And then, of course, your resource localization. So what are you going to call that thing? What's the label that's going to show up? So again, on the previous slide, you saw the labels for the 3 custom components that we had. This resource localization is what controls that, either an RB info file or now there's Java resource files as well. Whichever one you happen to be using is what's applicable. The fourth piece is creating your custom table builder, your MVC builder. MVC is a little different in JCA in that, so step 5 there, you can see you provide a location where the MVC framework is going to scan for your class files. Your class files would define at the top, step number 4 there, you can see that it's defining a component builder for my action, TE ECR part inventory, for example. You'll notice that value, TE ECR part inventory, matches exactly with my step number 1, my component name, TE ECR part inventory. And the MVC framework kind of wires all that up for you and takes care of that. Step number 4, I'm just showing you a snippet of what that class file is. There's a bunch more stuff in there. There's methods to define, what columns are in your table, and then there's a method to define what data fills those columns. So that would all have to be configured. That level of detail, I'm not going to go into too much here, but actually on the next slide I can show you there are some examples that PPC does provide that you can walk through. For those who aren't aware, there are pre-canned examples of a lot of this stuff that PPC does provide. The way you enable that is if you go to your site, go to Site Utilities Preferences. There's a preference in there called Client Customization. If you turn that on, that enables that hammer and what looks like a screwdriver, I guess, icon, which gives you the ability to see the component catalog, the tools, and the documentation. If you chose that component catalog, I'm just showing one item on the bottom right-hand corner there, but there are examples in there as to how to build tables, how to build tree tables, how to build attribute panels. There's examples in there as to how to do a lot of that stuff. So there is a starting point. In addition to that, if you're curious about how the MVC framework kind of works, if you go into your help screen, type in MVC components, you'll get a whole bunch of stuff that comes up. I provided a URL on the bottom of the slide there that will also give you some more detail as to how this stuff all kind of wires together. And there's, of course, a lot more information in the Customizer's Guide as well as to how to wire up these MVC components. The next piece, once you've defined your template, how do you use it? So I mentioned earlier, the name of your template becomes really important. So when you get into your workflow process administrator and you now want to select the template that you want to use, you're on your activity tab. You can see on the third selection there is template name. This is where your template name that we assigned a few slides back would show up. So you select your template name, and now that template that you just built is what's going to render for this particular workflow activity that you've defined in your workflow process. The image to the right shows you, the very simple version of what these native task form templates do. So you can see the tabs across the top. Obviously, the names are a little different here. I had tab 1, tab 2, tab 3 defined in my earlier examples. In this case, I've defined a tab called Task Instructions, and all I've put on this tab are my instructions, and then you can see the actions on subject, which would be my list of UI actions for my ECR object. My History tab, I've put on there, all the history, the workflow process history. So if you looked at that table, you would be able to see, all the different voting selections people have made, all the comments they've put in for all their different task assignments, but separated that on a separate tab so that the user doesn't have all this content on one tab that they now have to scroll vertically to get through. So most task assignments that we have, some of them are simple, some of them are very complex. If we were to put all that content on a single tab, we would be forcing the user to, scroll up and down a really long ways and force them to look at content that they may not necessarily care about, right? They may not, some users may want to look at history, some may not. So if I put that on a separate tab, it's not in their way. If they want to look at it, it's there. Same thing, related data. In this case, we've put the affected items table on the related data tab. Again, just kind of categorizing data and kind of cleaning up the screen so that it's very clear as to what we want them to do and what we want them to see. Applications for native task form templates. So there's a number of applications that we've tried to use these for, but some ideas that we've been trying to use these for are, for instance, when you're asking a user to assign stock dispositions during your engineering change process, it's pretty handy to pull in inventory levels from SAP. So you could configure your own custom MVC table that, if I've got 100 parts on my change request, it pulls those 100 parts in, tells me what the inventory levels are for each one of those. That's an idea. Sales and or cost data. So if you're trying to determine the impact or cost to do the cost analysis on a particular change, it'd be handy to know, what's my sales data? How many customers am I selling this stuff to? What are my costs associated to this particular part? Showing a where used. So again, that cost impact analysis. If I'm changing this part or this drawing or this model, what other things are related to this that I might also have to consider, right? That's a whole impact analysis. And for us here, that's a pretty critical task, right? If I'm changing a part, what production tools are related to that part? What specifications and other engineering documents are related to that part that I might also have to consider? So again, we put that information in front of the user as opposed to telling them, we want you to manually go out and dig around the system to find the documents you're looking for. We put that all in front of them. Here's a list of all the other associated things that you might want to consider that may have to change based on what you're doing. And the fourth bullet there is related validation messages. So we talked about that a little bit earlier. We do publish data downstream to other systems. I know a bunch of folks on the phone, you do similar things. So if you're publishing data down to those systems, most times there's some pre-validation checks that most folks would want to do. Right, so we do those pre-validation checks, and then we put those validation messages right in front of our users on their task assignments and say, here's the things that are okay, here's the things that are going to not be so good, and you're going to have to do some tweaking to your data because it's inevitably when you go to publish this stuff, it's going to fail. And we give them those messages back so that they can kind of help themselves, as much self-service as we can possibly do. And there's also several other opportunities for this. I mean, if you think about what a user, it really comes down to, what does the user need to make their decision for the assignment that you've just given them in their change process? And then think about, how can I give them that information right there in front of them as opposed to having them click around, go to maybe multiple systems to find that? How can I put that information right in front of them, front and center? Pros and cons for task form templates, the native task form templates in particular. The pros obviously went up through a bunch. They use the MVC and JCA action framework, which is all supported, mostly configuration type stuff, unless you create your own. They're really easy to configure. So, you saw it's basically got a UI wizard that steps you through creating those task form templates. So really easy to do. If you're using existing actions, you don't need to be a developer to create one of those. Tables can support an MVC table, a custom component that you're going to list parts in, WT parts. Well, if you define in your MVC builder that that's what you're going to put in that table is WT parts, what also comes along is all the actions. So when you right-click on the rows in that table now, you get all the standard part actions as well. So all that stuff kind of carries through in the background. That framework is all there. Last piece is there's no file content to manage. So you don't have to worry about managing the JSP templates, the XDP templates. For most folks, if you've got a standalone system, probably not an issue. If you've got a clustered system and you package it like we do, what we found is those JSP templates, when we went to package them, the JSP template, it gets loaded to the database, but then your Windchill application actually syncs it down to the file system, and then that's where that JSP is consumed. Well, if that synchronizing back and forth down to your file system didn't work out so well, what you end up with is, on some nodes of your cluster, it's using one version of the JSP, and on other nodes of the cluster, it's using a different version of the JSP, so it becomes a little messy. These native task form templates are all schema-based, so you don't have that problem. The cons, JSP templates, obviously you lose a little bit of flexibility, right? So if you've got your own JSP template, you control the JavaScript, you control the HTML, you've got a lot more control with the JSP templates, and you lose that ability with the MVC base. native task form templates. You know, you're basically building UI components and you're putting them on the screen. You don't have access to mess with the JavaScript and everything else on that page like you would with a JSP template. Similarly, you can't change the page styling. Obviously, you aren't controlling the CSS, right? And unless you've messed with a global CSS, you know, you are not messing with the CSS on an assignment by assignment basis because you don't have, it's no JSP, right? Again, you're plugging and playing action. And then the last piece, which we've done in the past, is we've hidden and shown action on JSP templates. You know, a little bit of screen scraping and JavaScript magic, but obviously because you can't use JavaScript, you lose some of that ability as well. So there are some pros and cons. In our case, the pros far outweighed the cons and made, you know, this a viable solution for us to show dynamic content to users on their task assignments. The next portion of the presentation we're going to flip over to is the process flexibility. So we just covered how do I give them dynamic content? How do I address the content flexibility problem? Now we're going to look at the process flexibility problem. Unlike the ECN process, the ECR process doesn't have the concept of change templates and implementation plans, right? So you really don't have the flexibility to build in your own steps, right? It's whatever's in your ECR process is what's in your ECR workflow process, which means you end up with a couple different scenarios that we'll look at, and I think it's the next slide. What I'm depicting in the middle of the screen there is, you know, how you go about setting up your change templates, your implementation plan. So from an ECN perspective, this worked out great for us, right? We can tell each of the products and libraries in our system, look, you guys are going to control your change templates. If you've got a change template that you want to create for new product creation, that's good for you. If you've got a change template you want to create for, you know, a full sustaining, full engineering change, full track change process, you can do that too. So we allow them to define their own change templates, which gives them a whole bunch of flexibility in the ECN process. Where we were lacking that flexibility was in the ECR process. Our company, unfortunately, we have to do a lot of the work up front, not making the actual changes, but we have to do a lot of the analysis up front because we have a customer notification process. If we have customers that have agreements with us that say, you need to notify me before you make a change, right? We may have to notify customers 30, 60, 90, 120 days out before we're allowed to make that change. So we have to have done all this analysis, not made the changes, but done the analysis up front, which means from an ECR perspective, the bulk of our work actually happens on the ECR side, and then actually implementing that work happens on the ECN side. So what we needed was a whole lot of flexibility on the ECR process side for each of these business units to kind of have the process flexibility that they needed, and that was where we struggled. One additional note is at the bottom there. For those change tasks, there is a property setting. If you need multiple participant selection on your change task, that is available. There's a property setting you can set, and that screenshot to the right, instead of only being allowed to select one assignee, one reviewer, you can select multiple. So that came in handy for us as well. This is just, again, a little more detail on the change template implementation. I won't spend too much time here. You can see, you know, you go to the templates screen like we did earlier. You choose change templates. You can go through the steps of defining one or more change templates. Within your change template, you have implementation plans, which you can see on the bottom right. Your implementation plans define the X number of steps you want the change activity within your change notice to go through. So if you've got 10 steps you want to happen during a change notice, you can define those 10 steps with your implementation plans, with your change notice templates. And again, you might have more than one change notice template. You might have one that's specific to new product creation. You might have one specific to a full track process, et cetera, et cetera. You can have more than one change template, and those templates can have X number of implementation plan steps in them. Going to the ECR, the flexibility in the ECR process, we evaluated basically three solutions. The first was we could create different workflow processes for each business unit. So at the time we had 9. So we could have gone the route of creating 9 business unit specific full-blown ECR workflow processes. We could have done that. The problem with that is within each of those 9, there were a number of components that were common. So there would have been large portions of those 9 processes that would have been duplicated because some of the functionality between them is, you know, spot on identical. From a development perspective, what does that mean? Well, it means if I make a change to 1, I've got to make a change to 9. So from a maintenance perspective, wasn't wasn't really what we wanted to get ourselves into. And then from a usability perspective, it just didn't make a lot of sense. From a system perspective, it was really clean, right? You create 9 distinct workflow processes, and you're good. And that was 9 processes, but where can that go? We have 9 business units, but within each of those business units, there's multiple segments. You could see this going well beyond 9 and could start to get out of control quickly from a maintenance perspective. The second thing we evaluated was ad hoc tasks. Within your workflow process, and we'll look at this a little bit, you can define assignments that are ad hoc activities. Those ad hoc activities is basically it's ultimate flexibility, right? It gives the user who gets the assignment the ability to create more assignments. So the user gets an assignment and says, here's a table. You define the instructions, the order, who gets the assignment, et cetera, and then you trigger that off, and all those assignments go out. Each of the assignees for those assignments can get more assignments. So you can see where it starts to snowball. The biggest issue with ad hoc tasks is it's not a repeatable process. So you give them these ad hoc activities, they define them, but they're not repeatable, right? There's no template. So every time they get this, even if they've got the same 10 steps they want to implement every single time, they've got to type in those 10 steps every single time, right? There's no template, so it's not repeatable. The third thing we evaluated was, is there a way we can create one standard process? It has all the components in it that, we've managed to speak with the business units, and they've all agreed, these are the common pieces of a workflow process that we all agree on. And then within that standardized process, we allow sub-workflow processes that are very specific to each of the business units. And we know when to trigger those sub-workflow processes based on the parts and the documents and the drawings that are on the ECR, right? So I know that this particular document part, whatever, belongs to this product belongs to this business unit. We know how to make that linkage, so we would know which sub-processes to kick off. And we'll look at that a little bit more. This third option, it's inevitably the option we took and we rolled with. It's slightly less clean in that, there's a little bit of custom code in the middle there to trigger those custom workflow processes. But it buys, from an IT perspective, buys us that standard process where we can share those components across several business units, and it gives the business units the flexibility they need to have their own custom steps and own custom workflow processes nested within that. So basically a win-win from both sides. Preview real quick of what ad hoc tasks are. So again, if you chose the ad hoc task route, this is what you would get on your assignment. So a user would get this assignment. You can see the ad hoc activities table in the middle. Again, they type in, what is your activity name? Who's the assignee? What are the instructions? There's a button there that says offer, not offer, which means it's required or not required. There's a duration for the task, and then predecessors. So you can order these things. You can say 1 comes before 2, then after 2 comes 3. You can define all that. And then below that, you have your setup participants table. If you have users in the document control role, for example, you can type document control in as the assignee, and that'll work. So a number of problems. One is it's a whole lot of open text boxes, and frankly, users make mistakes, and they make them often. So that was a problem for us. Number 2 is it was not repeatable. So if a user had 15 steps, 10, 15 steps that they would typically type in, they would have to type those in every single time they ran an ECR process, right? There is no save this as a template so I can reuse it again. You have to do this over and over and over again. So for the most part, our users like the idea of having this, extreme flexibility, but the fact that it wasn't repeatable and it was prone to error just far outweighed the benefit. So we ended up not going this route. Quick look at what we could have done from a standard ECR perspective, right? We could have built one ECR process that had conditional statements all over it that said it's going to go to, if affected items on the ECR is this, then we go this path for BU task. If it's not, we go this other path for BU task. We would have had 9 different parallel paths, and in some cases, if you've got multiple business units within the same ECR, you could have those multiple parallel paths all kind of executing at the same time. And that's assuming 9. What if you've got 10, 20, 30, 40 different business units in your company, right? I mean, there were a bunch of folks that I listened to in those live work sessions that, they're same thing. They're acquiring companies all the time. Depending on how you restructure, that means, perhaps multiple business units in your company. How do you deal with that? You're And if you do this, that means every time you get a new business unit or similar, or something changes in your business unit, you're constantly having to maintain and modify that overall enterprise process, as opposed to just modifying a small process that's actually impacted, right? It means changing your entire ECR process, iterating that process for subtle changes within business unit specific things. So this is what we were looking at, and this is where we ended up, which was, I'm going to define a standard ECR process that has all the typical components in it: a design review, a manufacturing engineer review, a quality engineer review. You know, again, there's some options that come on and off for those things depending on what you're actually changing. And then within that, we've got a workflow expression that says, let me evaluate what business units are involved with this ECR based on the documents, the drawings, the parts that are on the ECR. And then based on the outcome of that, we've got, you know, multiple, up to 9 sub-workflow processes, workflow templates that we've defined for each business unit. And this workflow figures out which business units are impacted and then triggers off those separate, smaller workflow processes. What that gives us the ability to do now is, if one of the business units comes to us and says, I need an additional step, well, I don't have to go to my enterprise ECR process and mess with that and put steps in. All I have to do is go to my smaller workflow template for that particular business unit and insert a step into that process. And that process is usually very simple, right? The ones that we're looking at right now are, you know, realistically no more than 10 or 11 steps in those sub-processes maximum that we're seeing right now. So very easy to mess with those smaller sub-processes than it is to mess with a, you know, enterprise level ECR process that has, you know, 60, 70 steps in it perhaps. So this greatly reduced the flexibility that we had, or greatly reduced the maintenance burden for us in our ECR process, while also give a lot of flexibility to the business units to be able to insert their own workflow assignments, their own custom instructions, their own roles that they needed to complete those assignments. So it gave us all that flexibility that we really were looking for to begin with. So this is the route we went. With that, I know I'm pushing my time here a little bit, so I'll end. I went through an awful lot of stuff there really fast, a lot faster than I did in the live work sessions. So I guess at this point, I'll open it up for questions, and I'll try to answer them as best as I can.
Okay, great. Let me just look at the queue, Gary. There are a few questions, and perhaps the best thing to do would be unmute Abhishek. He has a few questions, and perhaps Abhishek, if you could please ask the question yourself, then I think that might make sense, because you have 2 long questions. So you're unmuted right now, Abhishek. Could you try? Okay, seems like Abhishek is not able to get through. So his question is, in change notice template containing multiple activities, how do you manage the affected resulting items? For example, if there are 4 change activities in change notice, first for affected, second for engineering collaboration, third for quality, and fourth for marketing, how do you manage people to review those affected and resulting items?
Yeah, so good question. So when you set up those change activities, one of the options you have to select in there is whether you want to include the affected and resulting items. So from our perspective, there's generally an activity in the list that says, you know, for the design engineer or the manufacturing engineer to actually make the change, and that'll say modify affected objects or something like that, and we include that affected and resulting item in that particular change activity. And then we've also got additional ones that will say, you know, I need you to review this change, or I need you to approve this change before it completes. Those things don't have that affected resulting selection in them, but we've gone down the path that if the user requires those, you know, if the user requires to see that type of data in their task assignment, that's one of the areas where we've gone down the path of saying, you know, maybe we need one of those custom UI components to show them what they need to see without configuring the change activity to pull in affected and resulted items on them.
Yep. Can you hear me okay? Abhishek here.
Yes. Yes, we can.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. That has been a big challenge for us, when we have a lot of collaboration happening in the change activity. People are trying to approve, but they got to, click multiple times to reach the items that are in the change, So we were looking at if there is some method available outside saying, okay, there is one activity which is common, which is going to be pulled at every collaboration activity to show the items, but looks like there has to be some custom thing done here.
Yeah, and I would suggest where you probably want to go is you can define task form templates, custom task form templates for change activities. So again, maybe what you want to do is create a custom task form template for your change activity that shows affected objects. And when you'll have to choose those templates, of course, in your change activity to workflow process, so that your particular steps, show that particular template. But that would be a problem that I think you'd be able to solve with those task form templates.
Yeah, we're using that, but I understand. Thanks, Jeff. The second question that I had here was in the participant selection. So really, what I was looking for is, do you guys have any implementation on like a role selection? Like what people do is they have a similar to participant selection, they have a role selection as to what are the roles in scope here, which are dynamic through that tool. And as people select roles, then the subsequent task will have users being pulled from those roles which were selected, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so yep, absolutely. The path we went down is we're actually very heavily team template driven. So our business units within a given product, there might be 10, 20, 30 product lines, and different people need to be involved in the change process depending on the product line. So what these guys have actually done is they've created team templates. The roles are all very standard, right? So a design review is always a design engineer. A quality review is always a quality engineer. But what they've done is they've gone down the path of, I'm going to create a change template, or a team template for this particular product line within my product, and that's the team template they select at the beginning of the ECR process. We do have a setup participants table that we show. It's just that setup participants table loads up from the team template, and then from there we allow them to down select. We allow them to remove people. So their team template defines the superset of users that they want for that particular product line, and then from there during the ECR process we allow them to remove people from those roles to give them that ability. We've also done some customization behind that setup participants table to enforce some other rules that we have, but that's the path we've gone for that.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Gary.
Sure thing.
All right. The next question was from Vineet, and he says, thank you for the ECN process info and template. Template to set up ECN, ECR are good. I have a question about ECN template. If in my organization, for a particular business unit, all the manufacturing operations and single part drawing are not done at a single location. Some of them are done at first supplier, some at second supplier. And if I do some changes in this part drawing, how do these two different suppliers get notified? And two, can the template be set to notify a particular second supplier who is not related to the change in the drawing?
That's a really big question. So
yes.
From a change notice template perspective, again, what you got to keep in mind is change notice templates are going to define your activities. Those activities are always going to have an assignee and possibly a reviewer. So if all you're going for is just to notify someone, then your change activities are probably not what you want to do, because those are going to give an assignment to someone to do something. I will say that what we've done in our environment at the moment is twofold for notification. We have what sounds like somewhat of a similar problem in that if we make particular changes, we do have to notify some suppliers of those changes because they either use some of our parts in their processes or their manufacturing processes, and they have to be notified. They aren't necessarily the owners for those parts, drawings, models, but they have to be notified when we make changes of those. We have another process that we're basically putting in place. It's part of our ECR process that's It's somewhat based on subscriptions. So if they subscribe to the part model drawing in the Windchill system, we'll send them a notification. Obviously, Windchill will send them a notification. We've also put some custom stuff that we've done. It's entirely custom, but during our ECR process, we go out, we get a list of all the models, drawings, parts that are affected, and then we have a separate application in our environment that keeps track of who are the folks that need to be notified for these particular parts and product lines. And we contact that system. It gives us back a list of all the people we have to notify, and then we have a custom workflow robot within our workflow process that does that notification. But it sounds to me like what you're asking about is really a notification process, not an assignment process. So I don't know that change templates are necessarily the right thing to do. I mean, you would have to, if it's during your change notice, you'd either want to probably put something into your change notice workflow or maybe your change activity workflow to do some notifications based on some custom logic that you've got. I mean, you can also do the same thing in the ECR process if it made sense, but I don't know that the change notice templates are necessarily going to buy you the notification function that you're looking for.
Okay. Thanks, Gary. Hope that answers this question. Is this customization, going to the next one here, is this customization process possible in Windchill 10.2?
The answer is yes. We actually, when we put the design for this together, we put it together against 10.2. We just went to version 11 about 2 or 3 months back, and just basically kept plowing along with the same design. So yes, everything I talked about here is absolutely possible in 10.2 and 11.
Okay, great. Next one from Charles. Can you share the method you use to launch the business unit specific workflows from the ECR? Yeah, I'd have to go. I don't know it off the top of my head. I'd have to go look at the source. But inevitably, there's a workflow service helper that you can use, and you're basically starting up a brand new workflow process. I think I'll be, Davi, correct me if I'm wrong. I think what I'll be doing is we'll probably post this presentation somewhere. I can try to add a slide that's got some API calls on it if that helps. Okay. Yeah, that'll be great if you can do that. Okay, so I'll try to add another slide in here that's got some of those API calls in them. Okay, and Charles, if you could, please do let us know if that answers. Otherwise, you could reach out to Gary directly or myself, and I'll be able to point you to Gary. Okay.
Yeah,
the next
absolutely.
One was,
anybody who has access to PPC users should be able to find my contact info as well. So.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. The next one from Yale is, do you know of an easy way to display affected and resulting data in 2 separate tables rather than changing the menu options to switch between intent and release parts?
I mean, certainly the MVC components that I talked about earlier would be, I guess it's kind of tough to answer your question without knowing the exact requirement, but if what you're trying to do is have some downstream workflow assignments that represent affected items in one table and resulting items in another table, that would certainly be possible with some MVC components that you could probably pretty easily build. A lot of those affected items tables are, you can almost use them as is with very little customization to them. But once you go down the path of creating your own custom tables and actions to plug them into those native task form templates, I mean, you can do pretty much whatever you want. If you only wanted to display affected items on that task assignment, you could do that. If all you wanted to display was resulting items on that task assignment, you could do that as well. Again, that would be a little more challenging to do within the change activities, but I mean, you'd have to create task form templates specific to the change activity to object, and then define whatever those custom tables are you wanted in there, and that would render correctly on your task assignments. That should work.
Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that helps. Yep.
Great. The next one is from Lawrence, and how do you set up the product categories so that they can be used as triggers? Also, can you define it based off the group a particular user is in?
So the short answer, I think what you're asking is how do I know what sub-processes to trigger? The short answer to that is we have a data warehouse here, and every one of our parts is tied to what we call a responsible design organization, and that maps back to a business unit. So we have a data warehouse that we are able to access that makes that linkage, right? We know for a given part what business unit it maps to. That is, of course, going to change company by company, right? I would doubt that, most other companies have the exact same facilities we've got to do that stuff. So that particular logic and that workflow expression that I talked about is entirely custom, right? So you're going to plug in your own custom code that's going to determine what sub-processes to kick off in a workflow expression robot. Ours just happens to go look at that data warehouse and figures out what business units are involved in this ECR, and then kicks off those sub-processes based on that, right? There's some mapping that we have in place that says if the business unit comes back as XYZ, well, then we're going to launch XYZ sub-process. If you had that based on a group, that would just be a modification to your custom code within that workflow expression. So, again, it comes down to your logic. If you can identify the list of affected objects on the ECR, you'd have to define your rules. If I find parts, documents, drawings that are in this PDM link product or that WT library or whatever it is, those things map to this particular WT group, and then you should trigger this, XYZ subprocess. That particular workflow expression robot is what you make it, right? It's entirely, the code in there is custom to trigger based on your own custom mapping rules. So you would have to define that.
Lawrence, does that answer your question? You're unmuted. Okay, I hope it does. And moving on, the next question is from Martin. With JSP forms, we kind of struggle to update the JSP document once they're implemented. Do you have a technique or a process to update them?
Short answer is yes, we have a technique and process. The bad portion of that answer is it doesn't always work. That was the comment. That was the comment I made earlier about the struggles we have with JSP templates, which is why the native task form templates were so attractive to us, because they are schema-based, not file-based. Makes them a lot easier to deal with. To answer your question in short, is we have XML-based Windchill load files that we use to load those templates. Those JSP templates, we don't create them or load them through the UI. We have an XML-based Windchill load file, and we have tools here that we use to do package deployments to our QA and production environments. And so those packages run those load files. Where we have a problem is those load files, as is typical with most schema-based stuff, right? You can only run a load file for something once. So if you're in a clustered environment with 4 nodes, there are some load files that you can only run once. You can't run them 4 times, right? So we typically only run load files on the first cluster node deployment, which would deploy those JSP templates, and then as you may or may not be aware, what that does is it loads that JSP template as a blob, basically, and then the Windchill system then downloads that file to disk and gives it some unique name based on your organization ID, et cetera, et cetera. That download is what constantly plagues us here because it doesn't always work out the way we want it to. And then we end up with some cluster nodes that are using the previous version of the JSP template, and then other cluster nodes that are using the new one. So we've basically defined a manual step at this point. Whenever we change our templates, after that load happens, we've got a manual step in our implementation plan that says, go verify that the byte count on the JSP matches what it's supposed to after deployment, because that just doesn't work out so well for us. The native task form templates just completely solve that problem because you just run a load file and it's schema based, so there is no cluster problem there. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, Martin, did that answer your question?
Yes.
Probably not the answer you were looking for, but.
All right, moving on to the next one. This is from Dr. Trey. And do you have a plan to configure the process for prototype and production changes, or the process manages only production change? And there's a second part of this question which I'll ask.
Okay, so to answer that question, we do. So what I presented here was basically our full track ECR to ECN process. We do have separate ECN only processes for what we consider to be development parts, right? They're parts that are being designed, concepted, they're not being sold yet. And those are ECN only workflow processes that we've configured, and they're very short, very quick, because here we need to be able to get those prototypes and concepts out. We have a second process that we use that once you're ready to take that development part and move it to a production status, right? We have a process for that as well. So we actually have three different levels of engineering change process. One is for the stuff that is in development. One is to take the stuff from development to production. And then the third is basically the full track ECR ECN process, which is once you're in production, to change this thing, you've got to use this full track process now.
Okay, and the second part of the question was, give me 1 second here. How are you managing effectivity date, and how do you make sure the change is implemented physically as per effectivity date?
Another good question, and one that we struggle with, honestly. For us, I'll be completely honest, and the effectivity dates from a Windchill perspective don't matter so much because the effectivities are managed in our SAP system. So at the end of an engineering change, what we do is we take those effectivities and we pass them on to SAP. And at that point, they're managed in SAP. We currently do not manage our MBOM in our Windchill system. It's on our roadmap, but not something we're doing currently. So we send our EBOMs to SAP with the appropriate effectivities, and then over in SAP, someone takes that EBOM, copies it, makes an MBOM out of it, and then the effectivities become critical from an SAP perspective. So from Windchill, it's really, in our environment today, it's really more of a suggestion, right? We're suggesting to the SAP system, here's what the suggested effectivity dates are, but the actual effectivity is really managed in SAP for us currently because we aren't managing MBOMs.
Okay, and I guess there are a couple more things. Did you create any reports to monitor this data?
Yeah, so we've got tons of reports that we're creating. Some of which that were in the previous system and they need replacements for. Obviously, there's lots of reports around change history. There's lots of reports around change history. There's reports around showing effectivities. We've got reports around showing selected stock dispositions. And then I talked about it earlier. There's some other component data that we're pulling in, like recent sales data, inventory levels. Obviously, not only do we show that data in our task assignments, we also have capabilities for users to run reports to pull that data as well. So yeah, we've got lots of reports. And then we use some of those with dashboards, with pie charts and bar charts and all that other good stuff that makes them look good.
Great. The last part of the question is, do the production shop floor folks have access to Windchill change process to check the modified data?
The answer is today. So I guess I should have clarified earlier. Our engineering, this whole design is in flight right now. So this development is not yet active in our production environment. It's being developed. It's being evaluated, kind of tested currently. We haven't gone live with it yet. So in our current Windchill environment, for the most part, shop floor guys are not so involved, right? They predominantly do all their stuff based on the 2D drawings that they download from another system that we, ship our PDF versions of our drawings off to. So they look at those PDF copies, and then, all the rest of their work is really driven by, whatever they have to do from an SAP perspective. Moving forward, though, we are pulling in some of our manufacturing engineers. So I wouldn't yet say that our shop floor guys are necessarily participating in that engineering change process, but our manufacturing engineers certainly are. Our quality engineers certainly are. So largely moving forward, our shop floor people aren't so much involved in the engineering change process. Some of them, I'm sure, do have access to our system to download viewables and such, and I'm sure that will grow much more as we go here. The biggest problem, which I'm sure a lot of folks understand, is for shop floor folks and people like that, the last thing they want to do is log into Windchill because it scares them, right? They get into a super complex system like Windchill, and they don't want to look at all that UI. They want something much simpler, right? All I want is a document or a drawing. I don't want to see all this other garbage, right? That's what they tell you. So we are evaluating Navigate as an option for helping us out in that area. Again, something we're looking at, not yet implementing.
Okay, great. Thank you, Gary, for all those answers. Hopefully it answered the question. And the next one is from Shashi Kanta, and he asks, do you have an overview process chart? If possible, could you share that with us?
Define what you mean by overview process chart. Or like a Visio diagram of our current ECR ECN process. Is that what you're asking for?
Yeah.
Okay. That I'll have to talk to some folks here to see if I'm allowed to share that. If I am, I will. Same thing when I send the PowerPoint presentation in, I will include that if I'm allowed to, but I need to check to see if it's okay for me to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Moving on, next one from Amit. Can I add participants and activities dynamically through code?
Yes, I mean we are effectively doing that in our process today. So when the process that we're developing up front, the users have to define, as I mentioned earlier, we're very team template based. So up front, the users have to define a team template that is going to be used for the change process. We have our own code behind the scenes that basically scans through that team template and loads up, the correct roles in the ECR process. Where it gets really complicated for us is if there's multiple business units involved with a particular change, because then there's more than one team template that we have to deal with. Because I would guess that most folks would ask, well, why don't you just use the typical out-of-the-box stuff to load up a team template, and that would load your setup participants table. We would have. The problem is there may be more than one team template that we have to merge into our process if there's more than one business unit involved, right? So if we've got 3 business units, I may need folks to select 3 team templates that inevitably become the superset of users that are going to be part of this engineering change process. So we have the answer to your question is yes. You can programmatically load up folks into that workflow process, the team for the workflow process, and when you do that, those users will all show in that setup participants table. That is stuff that we're currently doing, and I'll take a note here as well that if I can find code snippets to put in this presentation, I'll see if I can find some code snippets for that as well.
Okay, great. Amit, hopefully that answers your question. Okay, the last one, I guess, is a clarification or maybe even a question from Lawrence. So does it look at the data warehouse based off the description?
No, we look at part number is critical here, right? So everything we do is very part number specific. So we go out to the data warehouse with a part number. And realistically, when I say data warehouse, what we're talking about is a bunch of tables, right? A bunch of Oracle data tables where all of our applications pump data into. So there's a subset of SQL and Oracle functions that people have built out there that when you provide a part number, it's capable of telling you here's the product line, here's the responsible design organization, here's the business unit, based on what you're asking for. But realistically, it's just SQL behind the scenes that's pulling data from several database tables to give you the information you need. So again, it would be pretty specific to what you're doing in your company as to how that would all piece together. But for us, it's part number.
Okay, Lawrence, hopefully that answers your question. I guess there's a follow. So could it be any attribute based? It's a follow-up to Lawrence's question about data warehouse.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it depends on from your company's perspective what attribute is important. Again, for us, it's part number. I mean, for others, I mean, if you wanted to base your process off of, another way we could have done this is maybe we could have carried an attribute on our part called product line, right? Well, then it probably makes sense to use product line as the basis for figuring out the business unit as opposed to the part. So again, really comes down to your business process, what's important to your business. If you're carrying an attribute on your part called product line or something else that's relevant for you to go out to your data warehouse and figure out who the business unit is, that's really up to you. And again, it all depends on how do you figure out in your business who the responsible business unit is, or segment, or company, sub-company, whatever your business does. What is the metadata you can use to tie those things together? That would be what you would use.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gary. I guess that's the last question, at least in the queue. Just waiting for another 30 seconds just to see if anybody has any last comments, questions.
Sure. And then for the folks on the phone, anybody who has access to PTC User, you have access to my contact information. So you should be able to find me. And if you have any follow-up questions, let me know. I will get these slides over to be, I guess, put somewhere. I'll talk to you after the fact, I guess, to figure out where I put these, but we'll figure that out.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Gary, for your insights and sharing your thoughts about this process. It's one of those very interesting and important ones, so really appreciate it. And folks, we'll post this, and you'll receive an email about the information once it becomes available. Or you could go to ptcuser.org and find that in the resources section. So thanks, everyone, and see you at the next webinar in a couple of weeks' time.
Thanks all. Greatly appreciated.
Bye.
Bye now.